Jesus 911.
Soul Patrol, Jesus 911, one-man car. Ruben Allen, my partner, is doing some apostolic work. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we focus on courageous Catholics. And I try to focus on courageous men, obviously, because I want to bring more men into the church. That's a virtue. Chivalry and courage is something that Catholic men are supposed to embrace, even though it's difficult. It's difficult to be courageous at such a time as this. But let me tell you, somebody who's not courageous, he's a very evil man. He's no friend of the Catholic Church, though he purports to be. And that's George Soros. He's actually stated that the COVID-19 crisis is a perfect time to abolish the family. Can you believe that? This is the epitome of evil. This is according to Open Democracy. This is a George Soros-funded nonprofit organization which is attempting to use the pandemic to destroy families, arguing that we deserve better than the family. And the time of the corona is an excellent time to practice abolishing the family. What type of diabolical spirit possesses this man to say something so contrary to the Word of God, so contrary to the plan of God? Well, in an article last week titled "The Coronavirus Shows It's Time to Abolish the Family," Open Democracy's Sophie Lewis calls for an end to the traditional family unit and tries to convince readers that COVID-19 pandemic is precisely the time to liberate themselves from the nuclear household. So Sophie Lewis, the spokesman for George Soros' Open Democracy nonprofit organization, claims that too many homes today are defined by the power asymmetries of housework, and that land ownership, mortgage payments, and patriarchal parenting are bad for our health. Sophie Lewis goes on to claim that queer and feminized people, especially very old and very young ones, are definitely not safe in such capitalistic home situations. There's another Western Journal report that says the following, quote, "There are a myriad of other bizarre statements, of other bizarre arguments made in Lewis's article. Most of them are basically feminist and communist critiques of how male-headed family is oppressive and that we need a complete overhaul of how we think about economics and family life." This is standard stuff for the left. In other words, in socialism, the state always comes before the family. And if you look at the funders of Open Democracy, provided by the organization itself, it shows that George Soros, his leftist Open Society foundations, are among the top givers of Open Democracy, along with other outfits that fund progressive causes like the Ford Foundation. Surprise, surprise. And perhaps the most ridiculous claim marshaled in the essay is when Sophie Lewis says, "We deserve better than the family." I wonder how she came to planet Earth. I'm sure it was through a family, right? I wonder how she was born and raised and nurtured. I'm sure it was through a family. But Sophie Lewis, the spokesman for Open Democracy, a nonprofit funded by George Soros, she says, "We deserve better than the family." And she says, at the time of the corona, this is an excellent time to practice abolishing the family. My head is spinning. My head is spinning right now. People like this actually live on planet Earth with us. Evil people like this. And they're not hiding it anymore. They're out in the open. What this Marxist leftist, Sophie Lewis at Open Democracy, has in mind to replace the family unit isn't spelled out in any detail, but she does use a lot of impressive sounding words in explaining what should come next. She says, quote, "Far from a time to acquiesce to family values ideology, then the pandemic is acutely important time to provision, evacuate, and generally empower survivors of and refugees from nuclear households," she writes. So I'm not sure exactly what she means by that, but from what I gather, it seems like if Sophie Lewis from Open Democracy, a nonprofit funded by George Soros, she seems to want taxpayers to provide blankets and subsidize housing to gender nonconforming trans teens who ran away from home so that they can have a judgment-free space to hide out or something like that. In any case, Lewis complains that the private family, the private family model of social reproduction, frankly, she's against it. She actually says, here's her actual words: the private family qua mode of social reproduction still, frankly, sucks. Why does it suck? She says, it genders, nationalizes, and races us. It norms us for productive work. It makes us believe productive work. That's exactly what the Bible calls us to in the Catechism and Catholic social teaching. The church calls us to productive work. But she says that productive work sucks. Sophie Lewis from Open Democracy, nonprofit, a group funded by George Soros. She says that it sucks because it makes us believe we are individuals. It minimizes costs for capital while maximizing human beings' life-making labor, and on and on. So she thinks that working, laborious work, is bad. That's actually what God called us to do. God called us to work and to make a living by the sweat of our brow. It brings dignity. Work brings dignity to a human being. Look at people who are unemployed and just living on the street and using drugs. They're depressed. Why are they depressed? They've lost their dignity. What restores a person's dignity? Work. When you work, it makes you feel like you're worth something, like you're contributing to society. I mean, give me a break, Sophie Lewis. You know, it's good to know that this woman's entirely unhinged way of thinking won't be gaining ground anytime soon. Men and women are hardwired by God to find a spouse, to start a family, to raise children, and go to work. The men specifically. In fact, there's actually anecdotal evidence that suggests that the coronavirus is actually bringing families closer together and that communal bonds are strengthening at this time. I can only imagine the examples of love and charity taking place right now that are giving folks like Sophie Lewis a massive headache, and that's a good thing. Yes, this COVID-19 virus is actually bringing families closer together again. In many instances, people are turning their homes into a domestic church, and that's a good thing. My name is Jesse Romero. You know, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we talk about muscular Christianity. Courageous